Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I paid a hacker on the dark web to track down an old classmate. When I logged back in, there was a file with my entire life history. Okay, so before you judge me, I need to explain that I wasn't trying to be malicious. I wasn't planning on hurting anyone or digging up some earth-shattering secret. Honestly, I just wanted closure. Or maybe validation. I'm not even sure anymore. What I do know is that curiosity is one hell of a drug, and it got the best of me. It all started on a random Sunday afternoon. I was in one of those weird, nostalgic moods. You know, when you're cleaning your room, and you suddenly find an old photo or a letter, and it just takes you back. Well, for me, it was an old yearbook. High school, class of 2014. The thing was practically falling apart, and the cover still had random Sharpie doodles from people I'd lost touch with ages ago. I flipped through it, laughing at the awful hairstyles and cheesy messages like, "Stay cool this summer," and never change. But then I stopped on a face I hadn't thought about in years. Jamie Wells. Jamie wasn't a friend. He wasn't an enemy either. He was just there. The guy everyone knew, but no one really knew, if that makes sense. He was the kind of kid who always seemed a little too clever for his own good. The one who'd quietly sit in the back of the room but always had some smart-ass comment that made the whole class laugh. He wasn't popular, but he wasn't bullied either. He was just Jamie. But here's the thing. Jamie had a reputation. Back in school, people whispered about him. Some said he could hack into the school's Wi-Fi to change his grades or spy on teachers' emails. Others swore he had a fake ID business on the side. Honestly, I didn't believe half of it, but looking at his face now, frozen in time, smirking in that cocky way he always did, I couldn't help but wonder, where was he now? Did he ever grow out of that wannabe hacker phase, or did he take it further? That's where the rabbit hole started. At first, I did what any normal person would do. I Googled him. Nothing. No Facebook profile, no Instagram account, no LinkedIn, no Twitter, literally nothing. It was like Jamie Wells had fallen off the face of the earth the moment we graduated. That alone was weird. Even the most low-key people I went to school with still had some kind of digital footprint, even if it was just an old Facebook profile they hadn't updated in years. But Jamie? Nada. I probably should have let it go. I mean, people disappear all the time. Maybe he changed his name, moved abroad, or just didn't care about social media. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I didn't know why I was so obsessed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Jamie was hiding something. That night, I started watching YouTube videos about the dark web. Don't ask me why. I think I was just bored and wanted to creep myself out. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? The animated horror stories where people talk about buying cursed dolls or stumbling into some shady chat room they couldn't escape from. Most of it sounded fake, but one story stuck with me. It was about a guy who hired a hacker on the dark web to track down someone he hadn't seen in years. It sounded ridiculous, but also kind of genius. I mean, think about it. If Jamie was really that good at hiding, maybe I needed someone just as good to find him. The next day, I started looking into how to access the dark web. Turns out, it's not as complicated as people make it seem. All you need is a browser called Tor and a little bit of courage. The hard part is figuring out where to go once you're on it. It's not like there's a dark web version of Google where you can just type, "Find Jamie Wells." After hours of clicking around and feeling like an idiot, I finally stumbled onto a forum called Dead Man's Lane. The design was super basic, just plain text on a black background, like something straight out of the 90s. The threads were unsettling. People were talking about things I didn't even know were possible, like how to wipe your digital footprint, or how to blackmail someone without getting caught. It was honestly terrifying, but I couldn't stop scrolling. Then I found it. A post titled, "Information Retrieval Services, Serious Inquiries Only." The username was CypherGhost. There was no profile picture, no bio, just a post that read, "Need to find someone. I can help." Social media lookups, phone numbers, addresses, background reports, and more. No questions asked. DM for pricing. I don't know what I was expecting, but something about it seemed legit. The guy even had a bunch of positive comments under his post like, "Thanks, CypherGhost, you're the real deal," and got exactly what I needed, fast and reliable. It was like reading Yelp reviews for a hitman. I hesitated for a long time before messaging him. My heart was racing and my palms were sweaty as I typed out a short, vague request, looking for an old classmate. "Can you help?" His response came back within minutes. Name, age, and last known location. $300 up front. That's when I realized this was real. Like, really real. I wasn't just watching YouTube videos about other people's bad decisions anymore. I was making one of my own. But instead of backing out, I doubled down. I created a burner email, bought some Bitcoin, which was way harder than I thought it'd be, and sent him the details. Jamie Wells, age 26, last known location, Crescent Hill, Pennsylvania. After sending the $300, I felt this weird mix of excitement and regret. Like, what the hell was I doing? I was paying a complete stranger to dig into someone's life, and I didn't even know what I was hoping to find. Closure, revenge, or was this just boredom? The next morning, I got a reply. "Got it. You'll hear from me in 5 to 7 days." I tried to push it out of my mind after that, but it was all I could think about. What if Jamie was hiding something? What if the rumors about him being some kind of hacker were true? The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. Every time I heard footsteps outside my apartment, I peeked through the peephole like some paranoid maniac. But nothing happened. For a week, it was just silence. Then, on the 7th day, I got the email. The subject line was simple. File, Jamie Wells. And that's when everything started to go wrong. The email came late at night, 2:43 a.m. to be exact. I wasn't even awake to see it arrive. What woke me up was the sharp ding of my laptop, one of those random notifications that only seems to come through when you're dead asleep. Groggy and annoyed, I shuffled over to my desk, squinting at the screen. That's when I saw it, the subject line that made my stomach drop. File, Jamie Wells. My hands trembled as I clicked on it. I had no idea what to expect, but I sure as hell wasn't ready for what I got. Attached to the email was a single PDF file, about 10 megabytes in size. It was named something cryptic, like Wells 62 D3 Alpha, which only made it feel more ominous. I hesitated, staring at the file for what felt like forever, a cold knot tightening in my chest. Finally, I double-clicked. The document opened, and the first thing I saw was a picture of Jamie. Only, this wasn't the Jamie I remembered. Gone was the cocky, smirking kid from high school. The man in the photo looked older, rougher, like life had chewed him up and spit him out. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his once messy brown hair was buzzed short, almost military style. He was sitting in what looked like a cramped office, a cup of coffee in one hand and a cigarette in the other. The timestamp in the corner of the image read March 12th, 2023, 10:14 a.m. The fact that the photo was so recent, less than a week old, hit me like a freight train. Cypher Ghost had found him, not just his online footprint or an old address, but him, in the flesh. I felt a mix of awe and dread, like I'd just summoned a ghost. The next few pages of the file were packed with information. It started with the basics: his current address in Chicago, his phone number, even his email. But then it got deeper, way deeper. There were screenshots of his personal emails, some dating back years. At first, they were mundane: conversations with coworkers, order confirmations from Amazon, a few spam messages. But as I kept scrolling, the emails became strange. There was one from 2018 titled "Regarding Our Agreement." The body of the email was short, just a single line: payment received, target acquired, awaiting confirmation to proceed. No sender name, just a long string of random letters and numbers. My stomach churned as I read it. Target acquired? What the hell did that mean? Was Jamie involved in something illegal, something dangerous? I kept scrolling, my curiosity outweighing my growing sense of unease. The next section of the file was all about his online activity. There were screenshots of his Reddit posts, private messages from Instagram, even chat logs from encrypted messaging apps. Most of it was harmless, stuff about video games, tech forums, and some mildly weird conspiracy theories. But then, on page 34, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was a chat log from a platform I'd never heard of, something called Obsidian Exchange. The conversation was between Jamie and someone with the username Dark Horizon. The messages were short, cryptic, and laced with a kind of cold professionalism that sent shivers down my spine. Dark Horizon. Package delivered. Confirm receipt. Jamie. Confirmed. No complications. Dark Horizon. None. Disposal handled as requested. Jamie. Good. Transferring final payment now. Disposal. Package. It sounded like they were talking in code, but the implications were clear and horrifying. Whatever Jamie was into, it wasn't just hacking or stealing credit card info. This was something darker, something violent. By the time I reached the last section of the file, I was sweating. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely focus on the words in front of me. But I couldn't stop reading. I had to know the truth, even if it scared the hell out of me. The final pages were filled with photos, not just of Jamie, but of other people, strangers. There were candid shots of them walking down streets, sitting in cafes, even standing in their own homes, taken through windows. Each photo was labeled with a name, a date, and a single word: confirmed. My mind raced with questions. Who were these people? What did confirmed mean? Were they targets? Victims? The thought made me nauseous. I closed the file, slamming my laptop shut, like that would somehow erase what I'd just seen. But the damage was done. I'd gone too far, and now I was in it, deep. The next morning, I woke up to another email from Cypher Ghost. The subject line was blank, but the message was chilling. Additional services available upon request. Let us know how you'd like to proceed. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. Additional services? What the hell was that supposed to mean? I hadn't even responded to their first email, and now they were offering me more. I didn't want more. I didn't want any of this. I just wanted out. Without thinking, I replied, "Thanks, but I'm done. Please delete everything." The response came almost instantly. Understood. Final file will be delivered shortly. Final file? What the hell were they talking about? I didn't have to wait long to find out. That evening, another email arrived. This one had a new attachment, labeled for your eyes only.zip. My gut told me not to open it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I downloaded the file, extracted its contents, and immediately wished I hadn't. Inside was a folder with dozens of subfolders, each one labeled with a name. My name was at the top. I clicked on it, and the screen filled with files, photos, documents, recordings. It was my life, laid bare in excruciating detail. There were screenshots of my Facebook posts, old tweets, even emails I'd sent years ago. But it didn't stop there. They had pictures of me that I didn't even know existed. Me at the grocery store, me walking my dog, me sitting at my desk last night, staring at my laptop. The timestamps on the photos were recent. Some were less than 24 hours old. That's when the paranoia set in. I closed my laptop and unplugged it from the wall, like that would somehow make a difference. Every shadow in my apartment felt sinister, every sound amplified to the point of madness. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and sat in the corner of my living room, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. And then the texts started. The first one came at 10:13 p.m. "We see you." The second, 5 minutes later, "Why did you stop looking?" The third was a photo of me, taken through my living room window. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about Jamie anymore. This was about me. Somehow, in trying to uncover his secrets, I'd exposed myself to something far worse. Something I couldn't take back. I don't know what's going to happen next. I haven't left my apartment in days. My phone keeps buzzing with messages I'm too scared to open, and every time I look outside, I swear I see someone standing across the street, just watching. All I wanted was to find an old classmate. I didn't realize I was digging my own grave. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep that night, but when I woke up, the sense of unease hit me like a truck. You ever wake up from a nightmare, and for a split second, you feel relief, because it was just a dream? Yeah, this wasn't that. My reality was the nightmare. My phone was on the floor next to me, buzzing with new notifications. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether I should even look. I already knew who the messages were from. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Don't do it." But curiosity, stupid, destructive curiosity, won out. The first text said, "Open your laptop." The second, "Do it now." And the third, it was another photo, this time of my building's front door. My throat went dry. Whoever was doing this wasn't just messing with me. They were here, close enough to watch, close enough to act. I don't know what I was expecting when I powered up my laptop, but the moment the screen flickered to life, I knew I'd made a mistake. My desktop background had changed. It was no longer the generic default wallpaper of a blue mountain. Instead, it was a black and white photo of my high school yearbook. My heart sank. The photo had been edited, though, specifically the page with Jamie Wells. His face was circled in red, and beneath it, in bold block letters, someone had typed, "You should have left him alone." I tried to close the laptop, but before I could, a loud ding echoed from the speakers. A message box had popped up on the screen, stark white against the black background. It simply read, "Ready to play." I stared at it, my hands frozen on the keyboard. Was this some kind of twisted joke? A game? Before I could even think of responding, the message box disappeared, replaced by a video feed. The video showed a dimly lit room, small and cluttered, like an unfinished basement. The walls were bare concrete, the floor littered with wires and tools. In the center of the frame was a single chair, and sitting in that chair was Jamie. At first, I wasn't even sure it was him. His head hung low, his chin resting against his chest. His hands were tied behind his back, and his face was bruised, swollen, almost unrecognizable. But the more I stared, the more certain I became. That was Jamie Wells. Older, yes, but unmistakably him. The camera didn't move. It was mounted somewhere, fixed on Jamie, like he was the star of some horrifying documentary. For a moment, I thought he was dead, but then he shifted, letting out a low, guttural groan. My stomach turned. A voice crackled through my speakers. It was distorted, metallic, like whoever was speaking was using some kind of voice modulator. "You found him. Congratulations." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my throat too tight to form words. The voice continued. "But you didn't stop there, did you? You had to dig deeper. You had to see what you weren't supposed to." My mind raced. How did they know? How long had they been watching me? Was this Cypher Ghost, or someone else entirely? "Jamie and I have history," the voice said, almost casually. "But you're a new player, and I like new players." The screen suddenly flickered, cutting to a new angle. This one showed Jamie from behind, his hands tied to the arms of the chair, his head lolled to the side as if he were barely conscious. That's when I noticed something else, a figure standing just outside the frame, tall, cloaked in shadows, their features completely obscured. They moved slowly, deliberately, circling Jamie, like a predator sizing up its prey. The figure spoke, their voice now directly into the camera. "Let me show you what happens when you ask the wrong questions." Before I could even process the words, the figure stepped forward, holding something sharp and metallic, a blade. My stomach flipped as they gripped Jamie's hair, yanking his head back. He let out a weak, muffled cry, but it was clear he didn't have the strength to fight back. I screamed at the screen. "Stop! What the hell are you doing?" The figure paused, their head tilting slightly, as if they'd heard me. Then they turned toward the camera, toward me. Even though their face was hidden, I could feel their gaze, cold and unrelenting. They spoke again. "You're a spectator now. Enjoy the show." What followed was brutal. I can't even bring myself to describe it in detail. All I can say is that Jamie didn't stand a chance. The figure was precise, methodical, almost clinical in the way they worked. It wasn't just violence. It was a message, a warning. And the worst part, they made me watch every second of it. The video feed cut out abruptly, leaving my screen blank. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then a new message appeared, the text bold and bright against the darkness. "Your turn is coming." The next few days were a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jamie's face, his lifeless body slumped in that chair. My apartment felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. I kept hearing things. Footsteps outside my door, faint whispers coming from the corners of my room. At one point, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, but when I blinked, they were gone. My phone was still blowing up with texts, but I stopped checking them. I didn't want to know what they said. I didn't want to see more photos of myself, or worse, more threats. But then, late one night, I got a call. The number was unknown. Against my better judgment, I answered. There was no greeting, no introduction, just the same distorted voice I'd heard in the video. Jamie wasn't the first, they said, their tone cold and detached. And he won't be the last. You should have left it alone. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I don't know who these people are or what they want from me. All I know is that they're not just hackers. They're not just criminals. There's something else entirely. Something bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than I ever could have imagined. And now, I'm their target. The messages haven't stopped. The photos haven't stopped. They know where I live, where I work, even what I've been eating. Every detail of my life is theirs, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. I made a mistake, a stupid, selfish mistake. And now, I'm paying the price. The silence in my apartment had become unbearable. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence, the kind you get after a long day when you can finally breathe. No, this was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, filled with the promise of something awful just around the corner. Every creak in the walls felt intentional. Every distant hum of a passing car made my skin crawl. I had locked my doors, shut my blinds, and turned off all the lights, but I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel alone. I kept replaying the video in my head, the sound of Jamie's muffled cries, the way the blade glinted under that dim, flickering light. It wasn't just violence. It was a message. They wanted me to know that they could find anyone, do anything, and leave no trace. I was next. I could feel it. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, just a few taps, like someone lightly rapping their knuckles against the wood. I froze. The clock on my phone read 3:12 a.m. No one should have been at my door, and certainly not at that hour. My first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend I wasn't home. But the knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. By the fifth knock, it sounded like someone was pounding their fist against the door. I crept toward the peephole, my heart hammering in my chest. Peeking through, I expected to see some faceless figure, cloaked in shadows. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty. I should have left it alone. I should have walked away and barricaded myself in my room. But something made me open the door. Call it curiosity, call it stupidity, but I had to know. I had to see. The hallway was dark, the fluorescent bulbs flickering weakly. There was no sign of anyone, no footsteps, no doors creaking shut, no shadows lingering at the edges of my vision. But when I looked down, I saw it. A small black box, neatly placed on my welcome mat. It wasn't wrapped, wasn't labeled, just a plain cardboard box with a single strip of duct tape sealing it shut. My hand shook as I picked it up. It felt heavier than it looked, the weight of it somehow more unnerving than the box itself. I brought it inside, locking the door behind me, and placed it on the kitchen counter. I didn't want to open it, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I grabbed a knife and sliced through the tape. The lid popped open with a soft click, and inside, nestled in a bed of crumpled newspaper, was a single Polaroid photo. I pulled it out, holding it under the dim light of my kitchen lamp, and immediately felt my stomach turn. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my apartment window. In the photo, I was sitting on my couch, staring at my laptop. The blinds behind me were partially open, just enough for someone to get a clear view. My blood ran cold when I noticed the timestamp scribbled in the corner of the Polaroid. It wasn't from a week ago or even a few days ago. It was from last night. The next morning, I called the police. I wasn't sure what I expected them to do. What could they do against people like this? But I was desperate. 2 officers showed up about an hour later, both of them looking tired and disinterested. I explained everything: the emails, the video, the texts, the Polaroid. I even showed them the black box, which they barely glanced at before shrugging it off. "Probably just some prank," one of them said, leaning against my kitchen counter like he had better things to do. Kids messing around online. I wanted to scream. A prank? What kind of prank involved torturing a man on video and mailing me photos of myself? But I didn't say anything. I knew it wouldn't matter. These people, whoever they were, weren't your average internet trolls. They were smarter than that. They were untouchable. The officers left after about 30 minutes, promising to file a report and keep an eye out. I knew they wouldn't. To them, I was just some paranoid guy who spent too much time online. That night, I decided to leave. Staying in my apartment felt like suicide. I packed a small bag, just the essentials, and booked a last-minute room at a motel on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a dingy little place with peeling wallpaper and a broken vending machine in the lobby, but it felt safer than staying at home. Or at least, it did at first. I didn't realize I'd been followed until I turned on the TV. The motel room was quiet, the faint hum of the air conditioner barely masking the pounding in my ears. I flicked through the channels absent-mindedly, trying to distract myself, when something caught my eye. The screen went black for a moment, then flickered back on, showing a grainy video feed. It was my apartment. The camera was positioned high up, near the corner of the ceiling, giving a wide-angle view of my living room. I watched, frozen, as a figure moved through the frame. They were tall, dressed in black, their face obscured by a hood. They moved slowly, deliberately, running their hands along the furniture, the walls, the blinds. They knew I wasn't there. They were searching for something, for me. I tried to turn off the TV, but the remote didn't work. The power button on the set didn't work either. The video kept playing, cycling through different angles of my apartment, my bedroom, my kitchen, even the tiny bathroom. Every corner of my home was under surveillance. Then the screen went dark again. A moment later, a single sentence appeared in bright white letters. "Running won't save you." I grabbed my bag and bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. My car was parked outside, and I practically threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped off into the night, my heart racing with every mile I put between myself and that motel. I drove for hours, aimlessly weaving through back roads and side streets, until I finally ran out of gas in the middle of nowhere. The road was dark, lined with thick trees on either side, and the nearest gas station was miles away. I sat in the car for a while, staring at the empty tank, trying to figure out what to do. That's when I heard it. A low, steady hum, like the sound of an engine idling. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a pair of headlights in the distance, slowly approaching. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just the car that scared me. It was the way it moved. Deliberate, predatory. Whoever was driving wasn't in a hurry. They wanted me to know they were coming. The headlights grew closer, and I realized there was nowhere to run. The trees were too dense to navigate on foot, and the road stretched endlessly in both directions. I was trapped. As the car pulled up behind me, its high beams blinding in the darkness, I saw a figure step out. They didn't say anything. They just stood there, silhouetted against the bright lights, watching me. And then my phone buzzed. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The message was simple, just 2 words. Turn around. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My entire body was locked in place, paralyzed by a kind of fear I'd never felt before. The figure behind my car wasn't moving either, just standing there in the glow of the headlights, a dark silhouette against the blinding white light. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. No sound, no movement, just me, the car, and them. Then, with deliberate slowness, the figure reached into their pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. A phone. They held it up, and I saw the faint glow of its screen as they began to type. A second later, my own phone buzzed in my lap. The message was waiting for me when I unlocked the screen. It wasn't long, just a single sentence. This ends tonight. I don't know what came over me, but in that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear, the paranoia, the helplessness. I was done with it. I threw the car into reverse, slamming my foot down on the gas. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I hurtled backward, the headlights illuminating the figure for just a fraction of a second before they dove out of the way. I didn't stop to see if they were okay. I didn't care. I just knew I had to get out of there. The road stretched endlessly before me, winding through the dense forest like a black ribbon. My gas gauge was still sitting firmly on empty, but I didn't care. I'd keep driving until the car gave out, and then I'd run if I had to. Anything to put distance between me and them. But the farther I drove, the worse the feeling in my gut got. Something wasn't right. The road wasn't changing. No turns, no intersections, no landmarks. Just an endless tunnel of trees and darkness. It was as if I were driving in circles, though I knew I hadn't turned around. And then I saw it. A faint glimmer of light in the distance, growing brighter with every second. Relief washed over me. A gas station. Finally, a chance to breathe, to call someone, anyone, for help. But as I got closer, my stomach twisted into a knot. It wasn't a gas station. It was my apartment. The blinds were drawn, the light in the living room casting an eerie glow through the window. My car rolled to a stop, the engine sputtering once before going silent. I sat there, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, staring at my own front door like it was a portal to hell. How was this possible? I'd been driving for hours. There was no way I could have ended up back here. And yet, there it was. I don't remember getting out of the car. I don't remember walking up to the door. All I know is that one moment I was sitting behind the wheel, and the next I was standing in my living room, staring at the same black box that had been left on my welcome mat the night before. It was sitting on the coffee table now, the duct tape peeled back, but the lid still firmly shut. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like I was wading through water. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, to run, to get as far away as I could. But I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. My arms wouldn't move. All I could do was stand there, staring at the box. And then, without warning, The lid popped open. Inside was a stack of Polaroids, neatly arranged like a deck of cards. I didn't want to look, but my hands moved on their own, pulling the top photo from the stack. It was a picture of me, taken from behind. I was sitting in my car, staring out at the forest road, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The timestamp on the corner was from 30 minutes ago. I pulled the next photo. This one showed me standing in the middle of the forest, my face pale and drawn, my eyes wide with terror. I couldn't remember ever getting out of the car, but there I was, clear as day. The timestamp? 10 minutes ago. The next photo was worse. It showed me standing in my living room, right where I was now, staring down at the open box. The timestamp was from 1 minute ago. I dropped the photos, stumbling back, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might explode. That's when I noticed the final photo, still sitting in the box. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me to pick it up. This one was different. It wasn't a picture of me. It was a picture of someone standing in the shadows, just behind me, their face obscured, but their presence unmistakable. The timestamp? Right now. The lights in the room flickered, and I felt it, the presence behind me. My body froze, every muscle locking up as cold breath brushed against the back of my neck. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't, but the urge to look was overwhelming. Slowly, I turned my head, inch by inch, until I saw them. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, their face hidden beneath a hood that seemed to swallow the light. Their hands were gloved, their posture unnervingly still. And then, as if reading my thoughts, they stepped forward, one slow, deliberate movement at a time. "Why?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" They tilted their head, the motion almost curious, like a predator studying its prey. When they finally spoke, their voice was calm, almost gentle. "Because you wanted to know." I don't remember much after that, just flashes, the figure leaning down, their gloved hands gripping my shoulders, the world spinning, twisting, as if I were being pulled through a vortex, and then darkness. When I woke up, I was back in my car, parked in the middle of the forest. My phone was dead, the gas tank still empty. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a horrible, vivid nightmare. But then I noticed the Polaroid sitting on the passenger seat. It was a picture of me, sitting in the car, staring out at the forest. But this time, there was someone else in the frame. The figure. They were standing just outside the driver's side window, their hooded face inches from the glass. I don't know where to go from here. I don't know if there's anywhere I can go. They're always watching, always waiting, and I don't think they'll stop until they've taken everything from me. My life, my sanity, my very existence. It's all theirs now. If you're reading this, take my advice. Don't dig. Don't go looking for answers you don't want. Because once you see the truth, there's no going back. And sometimes, the truth doesn't just find you. It takes you. And if you think you're safe, you're not. You never were. I found an invite on the dark web to visit a killer clown festival. The only rule was, don't laugh. So, I've always been the kind of guy who loves weird internet rabbit holes. You know, like watching conspiracy theory documentaries at 2 a.m. or scrolling through those creepy r/unresolved mysteries threads on Reddit. But I never thought I'd end up deep in one myself. Not like this. I didn't even mean to end up on the dark web. It just happened. It was one of those late nights where you're too tired to sleep, but too wired to relax. I had my YouTube autoplay running, flipping through some spooky animated horror stories, when I saw this comment under one of the videos. It was vague, like, "If you want real horror, check out this site," followed by a string of random-looking letters and numbers. Of course, me being me, I took the bait. I won't explain how I got there, because I don't want anyone else making the same mistake. But let's just say I followed a trail of breadcrumbs. First, I downloaded Tor, because apparently that's where all the creepy stuff lives. And after a couple of clicks, I found myself on this shady forum with a header that said, "The Real Thrill Seeker's Paradise." It was basically a collection of people bragging about the sketchy stuff they'd found online. Black market auctions, cursed live streams, secret cult meetups. Most of it seemed like fake edgy crap for attention. But then I saw it. A post titled, "Killer Clown Festival 2024. Join us for a night of madness. Rule number 1, don't laugh." At first, I rolled my eyes. It sounded so try-hard, like something out of a B-list horror movie. But the post itself was different. No spooky photos, no flashy descriptions, just a single paragraph. Come one, come all, to the most unforgettable festival of your life. You've seen the videos, you've heard the whispers. Now it's your turn to experience the madness. Sign up below to receive your ticket. One rule, do not laugh. Failure to follow the rule has consequences. Underneath was a link with a countdown timer. It said, "Registration closes in 3 minutes." I stared at the screen, my mouse hovering over the link. Was this a joke? A scam? But the countdown was already at 2 minutes, and my curiosity was clawing at me. I mean, what was the harm? It was probably just some elaborate marketing stunt, like those haunted house escape rooms that pop up around Halloween. Worst case, I'd get a spam email. Best case, I'd have a weird story to tell my friends. So, like an idiot, I clicked. The page it took me to was unsettlingly simple. Black background, white text, and a form asking for my name, email, and phone number. There wasn't even a logo or anything, just this weird, blocky font that said, "Welcome to the Festival of Fools. Enter your information to receive your ticket." I hesitated for a second, then decided to use fake info, because obviously I'm not going to hand my real details over to some creepy clown cult. For the name, I put Jack Wilson. For the email, I used one of those burner addresses I'd created for signing up for free trials. And for the phone number, I generated a random one using a fake number app. Easy. As soon as I hit submit, my screen glitched out for a second, like static on an old TV. Then the website disappeared, replaced by a black screen with a single message. "Your invite has been sent. Check your email for further instructions." I sat there staring at my laptop, half expecting something to jump out at me like one of those screamer pranks. But nothing happened. The room was dead silent, except for the faint hum of my fridge. It was almost disappointing. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short, just coordinates, and a single sentence. "Saturday night. Do not forget the rule." Below that was a clown emoji. I actually laughed out loud when I saw it. I mean, come on. A clown emoji? This had to be a joke, right? Some elaborate prank for people dumb enough to fill out the form. I almost blocked the number, but curiosity kept me from doing it. I wanted to see how far this would go. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, I got an email. It had no subject line, no sender info, just a plain text message inside. "You are officially invited. The festival awaits you. Follow the coordinates. Remember, do not laugh. I should have stopped there. I should have deleted the email, closed my laptop, and moved on with my life. But there was something about it that got under my skin. It wasn't the message itself. It was the tone. Like whoever sent it wasn't joking. Like they fully expected me to show up. And the thing is, I wanted to show up. I know how stupid that sounds. But you know how when someone tells you not to think about pink elephants, you can't stop picturing them? That's how I felt. I couldn't stop thinking about the clown festival. Saturday came faster than I expected. I spent most of the day trying to talk myself out of going, but by the afternoon, I'd already packed a bag with snacks, a flashlight, and a pocket knife, just in case. The coordinates were about 3 hours away, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Google Maps showed it as a blank spot surrounded by trees. No landmarks, no nearby towns, just an empty dot on the map. I told myself I'd drive out there, scope it out, and if it seemed sketchy, I'd leave. No harm, no foul. So, around 6 p.m., I got in my car, punched the coordinates into my GPS, and started driving. The first hour was fine, mostly highways and country roads, but the further I went, the weirder things got. The pavement turned to gravel, then dirt. Streetlights disappeared, replaced by the eerie glow of my headlights slicing through the trees. My GPS kept glitching, repeating, recalculating route, even though I hadn't made a wrong turn. And then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, something flashed by the passenger window. A person standing on the side of the road. Except, they weren't just standing, they were staring at me. I hit the brakes, but when I turned to look, there was no one there. Just trees. By the time I reached the coordinates, it was pitch black. My GPS announced, "You have arrived," but all I could see was a faint glow in the distance. I parked my car at the edge of a dirt path and got out, flashlight in hand. The air was cold, heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. And then I saw the tent. It was massive, way bigger than I expected. Red and white stripes, faded and torn, with strings of flickering lights casting creepy shadows across the clearing. There were a dozen cars parked nearby, but no people. Just silence. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to turn back, but before I could make up my mind, someone stepped out of the shadows. It was a clown, not like the ones you see at kids' birthday parties. This one was wearing a dirty, oversized suit, its mask pale and blank, except for a jagged red smile painted across the mouth. It didn't say anything, just tilted its head like it was waiting for me to move. Against every ounce of common sense I had left, I did. The clown didn't move as I walked past it, but I could feel its eyes, or the voids in the mask where eyes should be, pouring into my back. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my flashlight. Every logical part of me screamed to turn around, get back in the car, and floor it out of there. But something about the tent, about this entire setup, felt magnetic, like I was already in too deep. The entrance to the tent was wide open, flapping gently in the cold wind. Warm, flickering light spilled out, casting strange shadows on the forest floor. I stood at the threshold for a moment, gripping the edge of the canvas, before finally ducking inside. The air changed instantly. Inside the tent, it was humid, stifling. The smell hit me like a wall, popcorn mixed with something sour and metallic. It made my stomach churn, and I tried to breathe through my mouth. The interior was massive, way bigger than it looked from the outside, with rows of folding chairs, arranged in a circle around a central stage, and it was packed. I froze. There had to be at least 100 people sitting there, all wearing clown masks. They weren't talking, weren't fidgeting, weren't even looking at each other. Just rows and rows of blank, grinning faces staring at the empty stage. The only sound was the low, distorted hum of circus music playing from somewhere above. I quickly realized I was the only one without a mask. There was no one at the entrance to check me in, no one to hand out a program or explain what the hell was going on. I hesitated, then spotted an empty seat near the back and shuffled toward it, keeping my head down. As I passed the rows of masked attendees, I couldn't shake the feeling that their heads were turning, following me. But every time I glanced up, they were still, their faces fixed on the stage. When I sat down, I noticed something strange about the chairs. Each one had a little metal plate welded to the backrest, engraved with a single word: silence. My chair had it too. The message from the email, the one rule, suddenly felt a lot heavier. Don't laugh. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. The tense lights dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness, except for a single spotlight on the stage. The distorted music cut out, replaced by an eerie, hollow silence. And then, without warning, the stage lit up. A clown stepped into the spotlight. This clown was different. Its outfit was clean, pristine. A bright red suit with oversized buttons and perfectly shined shoes. But the mask was horrifying. It wasn't cartoonish like the others. It was hyper-realistic, with skin-like texture, sagging jowls, and bloodshot eyes. The mouth was sewn shut, the stitches pulling the lips into a grotesque, forced smile. The clown didn't speak. Instead, it raised one hand and snapped its fingers. That's when I noticed the cages. On either side of the stage, massive iron cages were slowly being wheeled into view by more clowns. Inside the cages were people, real people, not actors. They were blindfolded, gagged, and chained to the bars like animals. I could see their chests heaving, their bodies trembling. One of them, a woman with long dark hair, was sobbing uncontrollably. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a performance. This was real. The crowd didn't react. They just sat there, silent, as the cages were locked in place. The clown in the red suit clapped its hands twice, and one of the other clowns approached the first cage. It unlocked the door, grabbed the woman inside by her hair, and dragged her out onto the stage. She screamed against the gag, struggling, but the clown didn't even flinch. It dragged her to the center of the spotlight and forced her to her knees. The lead clown, the one in red, stepped closer and tilted its head, examining her like she was a specimen on display. Then it turned to the crowd and bowed, like it was inviting applause. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. I could feel sweat dripping down my back. My pulse was racing, pounding in my ears, but I was frozen. The clown straightened up, reached into its jacket pocket, and pulled out something long and thin. It took me a second to realize what it was. A knife. A long gleaming blade with a curved edge, almost like a scythe. The woman started thrashing, her muffled screams rising in pitch, but the clown didn't hesitate. It raised the knife high above its head and drove it straight into her chest. The sound was wet, like someone had dropped a watermelon on concrete. Blood splattered across the stage, bright red and glistening under the spotlight. The woman's body convulsed, then went limp, slumping to the floor in a growing pool of crimson. The clown in red stepped back, admiring its work, before turning to the crowd again. This time, it raised its hands in a slow, mocking clap. Still, nobody reacted. Not a laugh, not a scream, not even a gasp. I was shaking so hard I thought I might pass out. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. It was like I was glued to the chair, paralyzed by some invisible force. And the worst part? The clowns on stage weren't even looking at the dead woman anymore. They were looking at us. The lead clown snapped its fingers again, and the second cage was opened. This time, it was a man, bigger than the woman, maybe in his 30s. He tried to fight, tried to shove the clown away, but another one joined in, grabbing him by the arms and dragging him forward. They slammed him down on the stage, pinning him in place as the lead clown crouched beside him. I don't know why I thought it, but in that moment, I was sure they were going to kill him too. But they didn't. Instead, the lead clown reached into its pocket again and pulled out a rubber chicken. The clown held it up for the crowd to see, like it was some kind of grand prize. Then it squeezed it. Squee! The noise echoed through the tent, absurd and out of place. The man on the floor flinched, his body tensing, but he didn't make a sound. The clown squeezed the chicken again, slower this time, dragging out the high-pitched squeal. Then it leaned in close to the man's ear, holding the chicken inches from his face. I don't know how long it went on. The clown just kept squeezing the chicken, over and over, its head cocked like it was waiting for something. The man was trembling now, tears streaming down his face, but his lips were clamped shut. He wasn't laughing. He was terrified. Finally, the clown stood up and tossed the chicken aside. It reached into its jacket again, this time pulling out a pair of long, rusted pliers. The crowd leaned forward, ever so slightly, their masks glinting in the dim light. I realized what was about to happen, a split second too late. The clown grabbed the man's hand, yanked his fingers apart, and clamped the pliers around one of his nails. The man screamed, but it didn't matter. The clown ripped the nail clean off, blood spraying across the stage. Then it moved to the next finger. I had to look away. The sound of flesh tearing, of muffled screams, and the sickening crunch of bone was too much. My stomach lurched, and I thought I was going to be sick. But I couldn't leave. I didn't even know if I could leave. There were more clowns now, standing near the exits, their blank masks staring into the crowd. This wasn't a show. It was a test, a trap, and the only way out was to follow the rule. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen in that godforsaken chair, trying not to puke or scream or do anything that might draw attention to myself. My palms were slick with sweat, gripping the armrests so hard my fingers ached. The scene unfolding on the stage was indescribable. The clown with the pliers was working methodically, moving from finger to finger, yanking out the nails with mechanical precision. Blood dripped onto the floor in rhythmic splatters. The man's muffled cries were guttural, animalistic, the kind of sound that sticks in your brain long after you've heard it. No one in the crowd moved. No one even flinched. They just sat there, perfectly still, their stupid clown masks grinning in the dim light. The silence was the worst part. It was suffocating, wrapping around me like a noose. I wanted to scream just to break it. The lead clown, the one in the red suit, finally stepped forward, signaling for the others to stop. The man slumped forward, his body convulsing, his hands slick with blood. He was alive, barely, but he wasn't going anywhere. The lead clown crouched in front of him, tilting its grotesque mask to the side, as if it were studying him. And then It did something I'll never forget. It reached out with one gloved hand, placed it gently under the man's chin, and lifted his face. For a moment, the clown just stared at him, its head twitching slightly. Then it leaned in, pressing its mouth to the man's ear, and it whispered something. I couldn't hear what it said, but whatever it was made the man's entire body go rigid. His screams cut off, replaced by these horrible, choking sobs. The clown stepped back, gestured to the others, and they dragged the man off stage like a sack of garbage. I thought it was over. I thought they'd move on to the next person, the next performance. But instead, the lead clown turned to the crowd and clapped its hands once. The spotlight shifted, scanning the audience like it was searching for someone. I felt my chest tighten as it swept closer, the light bouncing off the rows of masks. I slouched in my seat, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure they could hear it. Then the spotlight stopped. On me. Every head in the tent turned toward me in unison. It was like a wave, the masks swiveling in perfect synchronization. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to stand up, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The lead clown pointed directly at me and snapped its fingers. 2 clowns appeared at my sides, grabbing my arms before I could even react. Their grip was vice-like, digging into my skin as they hauled me to my feet. I struggled, but it was useless. They were stronger than they looked, and I was too scared to put up much of a fight. The crowd parted as they dragged me toward the stage, the masks watching me with silent, unblinking intensity. I tried to tell myself this was just some sick prank, an elaborate haunted house, or an interactive horror experience. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't a show. This was real. They threw me onto the stage, right where the blood from the last victim was still pooling. The metallic tang of it hit me like a slap in the face, and I gagged, my stomach lurching. The lead clown loomed over me, its stitched mouth curling into what looked like a grin. It reached into its pocket and pulled out a deck of cards. It shuffled them with practiced ease, the motion smooth and deliberate. Then it fanned them out in front of me, holding them just out of reach. "Pick one," it said. Its voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was an edge to it that made my skin crawl. I hesitated, glancing at the cards. Each one had a symbol on it, some familiar, some I didn't recognize. There was a knife, a skull, a noose, a pair of dice. My hands were trembling as I reached out and plucked a card from the middle of the deck. The clown flipped it over, revealing the image of a hammer. The crowd erupted into muffled applause, their hands slapping together in perfect unison. The sound was hollow, like the clapping in a dream. The lead clown tilted its head, examining the card, then snapped its fingers again. One of the clowns from the sidelines stepped forward, carrying a massive sledgehammer. Its head was stained dark, the handle worn and splintered. The clown handed it to the one in red, bowing slightly before retreating into the shadows. The lead clown turned back to me, hefting the hammer onto its shoulder. It took a step closer, then another, until it was towering over me. I scrambled backward, my hand slipping on the blood-slick floor, but there was nowhere to go. "Laugh," the clown said. Its voice was louder now, commanding. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, their masks glinting in the light. I shook my head, my throat dry. I said, "Laugh." The clown raised the hammer high above its head. My heart stopped. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. And then it brought the hammer down. I rolled to the side just in time, the hammer smashing into the floor where my head had been. The impact sent a spray of blood and splinters into the air. The crowd roared, not with laughter, but with this horrible guttural noise, like a mix of growling and cheering. The clown didn't hesitate, swinging the hammer again, and this time it clipped my leg. Pain exploded up my thigh, white hot and blinding. I screamed, clutching my leg, but the clown was already lifting the hammer for another blow. My vision blurred as I crawled toward the edge of the stage, desperation driving me forward. The clowns on the sidelines moved to block my path, their masks leering down at me. One of them reached out, grabbing me by the collar and dragging me to my feet. It shoved me back toward the center of the stage, where the lead clown was waiting. "Laugh," it said again, its voice dripping with malice. I couldn't. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't. My chest was too tight, my body too racked with pain. The clown sighed, shaking its head, then raised the hammer one final time. But before it could bring it down, a loud, sharp sound cut through the tent. A laugh. It wasn't mine. It came from the audience, a single, high-pitched giggle that echoed through the silence. Every head in the tent snapped toward the source, including the clowns. For the first time, I saw one of the masked figures shift uncomfortably, their posture stiffening. The lead clown lowered the hammer and pointed toward the noise. Two clowns rushed into the crowd, dragging a struggling figure onto the stage. It was a young man, his mask slightly askew, revealing wide, terrified eyes. He was still laughing, the sound bubbling out of him uncontrollably, like he couldn't stop. The lead clown stared at him for a long moment, then turned to the crowd. "Rules are rules," it said. The clowns descended on him. I can't describe what happened next. I don't want to. All I know is that the man's laughter turned to screams, and then to something else entirely. By the time it was over, there was nothing left but a pile of shredded fabric and blood. The lead clown turned back to me, its mask spattered with red. It didn't speak this time. It just pointed to the side of the stage, where a door I hadn't noticed before was now open, spilling pale light into the darkness. I didn't wait for permission. I limped toward the door, dragging my leg behind me, my entire body trembling. As I stepped through, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, but there was no one there. The door slammed shut behind me, and I was alone. When the door slammed shut behind me, the sound reverberated like a gunshot. I stumbled forward, the adrenaline still pounding in my veins. My leg throbbed where the clown's hammer had clipped me, and each step sent a fresh wave of pain coursing up my body. The corridor I found myself in was narrow, dimly lit by flickering, exposed bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The walls were made of something that looked like warped plywood, splattered with stains I didn't want to think about. The silence was almost worse than the noise in the tent. Almost. I limped forward, every instinct screaming at me to keep moving. The air in the corridor was damp, suffocating, and carried a strange, chemical tang. As I turned a corner, I saw a new set of instructions scrawled across the wall in what looked disturbingly like blood. No turning back, no help, no laughing. The letters dripped as if freshly written, and my stomach clenched at the sight of a bloody handprint smeared beneath the words. I tried to focus on my breathing, tried to stay calm, but something about this place was alive. The walls seemed to creak and shift as I moved, the floor uneven beneath my feet. It felt like I was walking into the belly of something that could swallow me whole at any moment. The corridor forked ahead, splitting into two identical paths. No signs, no indication of where either might lead. Just darkness. I hesitated, glancing between them, before choosing the left one at random. It wasn't like I had a better plan. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and I began to notice faint, whispering voices, just barely audible over the sound of my own ragged breathing. The whispers didn't make sense. Fragmented words, jumbled sentences, like a dozen people murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. But one word kept cutting through, clear and sharp. Laugh. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from behind me, or even ahead. It was coming from the walls themselves. I pressed my hand against the plywood, and it felt warm, almost pulsing, as if something was moving just on the other side. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were faint at first, distant, like someone dragging their feet across gravel. But they were growing louder, faster. I turned, peering into the darkness behind me, but I couldn't see anything. The corridor was empty. Still, the sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was coming. I tried to run, but my injured leg buckled beneath me, sending me crashing to the floor. I scrambled to my feet, the pain screaming through my body, and forced myself forward, hobbling as fast as I could. The footsteps were closing in, heavy and deliberate, echoing through the narrow space. I rounded a corner and nearly screamed. There was a figure standing at the end of the corridor. It wasn't a clown, not exactly, but it was wearing a mask. This one was simpler than the others, just a pale, featureless face with hollow eyes and a slit for a mouth. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, blocking my path. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious, and then it began to take slow, deliberate steps toward me. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispers in the walls grew louder, more frantic, overlapping in a cacophony of nonsense. The figure kept coming, its footsteps perfectly synchronized with the pounding of my pulse. Without thinking, I turned and bolted down the opposite corridor, ignoring the pain in my leg. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't dare stop. The whispers were everywhere now, echoing and reverberating, each one laced with a hint of mocking laughter. I wasn't alone in the maze, and whatever else was in here with me didn't care about rules. After what felt like hours of running, I stumbled into a larger room. It was circular, the walls lined with mirrors that distorted my reflection into grotesque shapes. My face looked stretched, my eyes sunken, my mouth twisted into a grin that wasn't mine. I staggered to the center of the room, trying to catch my breath, when I realized I wasn't alone. There were bodies in the room. At first, I thought they were mannequins. They were posed like it, slumped against the walls, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. But as I got closer, the smell hit me. That sickly sweet stench of decay. My stomach turned as I realized these weren't props. These were people. Their faces were frozen in wide, unnatural smiles, their eyes wide open, glassy and lifeless. Some of them had ropes tied around their limbs, their bodies contorted like grotesque marionettes. Others had their mouths stretched open with metal hooks, forcing their grins to stay in place. And in the center of the room, written in bold, dripping letters across the floor, was the message: "You should have laughed." I staggered backward, barely keeping myself upright, when one of the mirrors flickered. I froze, staring at my reflection. At first, it was just me, pale, bloodied, shaking. But then it changed. My reflection's mouth curled into a grin, wider and wider, until it split open, revealing rows of jagged, too many teeth. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I swear I saw it wink. The lights in the room flickered violently, and when they came back on, the bodies were gone. I heard it again, the footsteps. This time, they were everywhere, coming from every direction. The walls seemed to close in, the mirrors warping and twisting as if they were about to shatter. I spun around, looking for an exit, but the room was seamless. No doors, no windows, just endless reflections of my terrified face. And then the laughter started. It was faint at first, a low chuckle that sent shivers down my spine, but it grew louder, multiplying, until it was a deafening roar. It wasn't human, too high-pitched, too distorted, like 1,000 voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of madness. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just in the room, it was inside my head, drilling into my skull. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the floor screaming, but the laughter drowned me out. I thought I was going to die. I thought this was it. And then, silence. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the mirrored room. I was lying on the ground, staring up at a sky so black it looked like ink. The air was cold, biting, and carried the faintest hint of smoke. I pushed myself up, wincing as my injured leg throbbed, and looked around. I was outside. The tent was gone, the forest gone. I was standing in the middle of a desolate field, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. In the distance, I could see a faint glow, a fire, maybe, or something worse. And then I heard it again, the faint sound of circus music, distorted and echoing, drifting toward me on the wind. The game wasn't over. The circus music was faint at first, just a low hum carried by the wind, but it grew louder with every passing second, like it was stalking me. I stumbled through the empty field, the grass brittle and crackling under my feet. There was no direction, no path, nothing but the glow in the distance and the oppressive darkness surrounding me. My injured leg dragged behind me, throbbing with each step, but I couldn't stop. I knew they were still out there. I could feel it. The laughter started again. Not the manic, distorted chorus from the maze. This was different, softer, closer. It came in short bursts, echoing in the stillness. I spun around, clutching the flashlight I'd somehow managed to hold onto. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but there was nothing there, just the endless field and the suffocating silence that came after the laughter died. And then I saw it. Far off in the distance, silhouetted against the faint glow, was a figure. It was standing perfectly still, watching me. Even from here, I could tell it was wearing a clown mask. The elongated nose, the hollow eyes, the twisted grin. My blood turned to ice. I backed away, limping as fast as I could, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, waiting. I turned and kept walking toward the glow, trying to focus on anything other than the sound of my own ragged breathing. But when I glanced back over my shoulder, the figure was closer. It wasn't walking. It wasn't running. It was just closer. I started running, or at least I tried. My legs screamed in protest, but fear pushed me forward. The glow was getting brighter now, flickering like firelight. I didn't care what it was, as long as it was away from them. But the laughter followed me, rising in pitch, overlapping like a sick symphony. It came from all sides now, surrounding me, closing in. By the time I reached the source of the glow, I was gasping for air. It was a massive bonfire, roaring in the center of the field. The flames licked the sky, casting long, flickering shadows across the ground. And around the fire, standing in a perfect circle, were more clowns. Dozens of them. They didn't react when I stumbled into the circle, collapsing onto my hands and knees. They just stood there, motionless, their masks glinting in the firelight. Some of the masks were familiar. Blank, stitched smiles, exaggerated grins, but others were different, more grotesque. One of them had hollow, gaping holes where the eyes should have been, the flesh around it painted to look like rotting skin. Another had a mouth stretched so wide it split the mask in half, revealing jagged, broken teeth beneath. The laughter stopped. The only sound now was the crackling of the fire. I tried to stand, but my leg buckled beneath me, and I collapsed again. The clowns didn't move. They just stared. And then, one by one, they began to clap. It wasn't normal clapping. It was slow, deliberate, mechanical. The sound echoed in the emptiness, growing louder and louder until it drowned out the fire. My vision blurred, my head pounding from the noise, and I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block it out. But it didn't stop. It just kept building, an unbearable crescendo, until I thought my skull would split open. And then the lead clown stepped forward. I recognized the red suit immediately. The lead clown was holding something in its hand, a long, thin object that gleamed in the firelight. As it moved closer, I realized what it was. A baton. The kind you'd see in a circus ringmaster's hand, except this one was sharpened to a fine point at the tip. The clown crouched in front of me, tilting its grotesque mask to the side. Its sewn-shut smile seemed to stretch wider, the stitches straining against the skin. It didn't speak. It didn't have to. I knew what it wanted. "Please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I didn't laugh. I didn't break the rule. The clown didn't react. It just reached out with one gloved hand and grabbed my wrist, yanking me upright. I cried out as pain shot through my leg, but the clown didn't let go. It pulled me toward the fire, its grip like iron. The others parted to let us through, their masks turning to follow me as I stumbled past. When we reached the edge of the fire, the clown stopped. It turned to face me, its head twitching slightly, and then it raised the baton. I thought it was going to kill me. I thought it was over, but instead it pointed to the flames. I hesitated, my mind racing. The fire roared in front of me, the heat searing my skin, even from a distance. The clown gestured again, more forcefully this time, the baton inches from my chest. It wanted me to go in. "No," I said, shaking my head. "No, I can't." The clown's hand shot out, grabbing me by the throat. It lifted me off the ground like I weighed nothing, its grip tightening until I couldn't breathe. The world blurred around me, the firelight burning into my vision, and for a moment, I thought this was it. This was how it ended, and then it dropped me. I hit the ground hard, gasping for air. When I looked up, the clown was gone. They were all gone. The fire had vanished too, leaving nothing but darkness. I was alone in the field, the silence oppressive and endless. But then I saw something in the distance, a faint glow, like headlights. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my leg, and started moving toward it. The light grew brighter as I got closer, until I realized it was coming from a road, an actual road. I stumbled out of the field, collapsing onto the pavement. A car screeched to a halt in front of me, and I heard someone yelling, but their words didn't register. All I could do was lie there, staring up at the sky, the laughter still echoing faintly in the back of my mind. I woke up in a hospital 2 days later. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. They found me with a broken leg, severe dehydration, and burns on my hands and arms. When the police questioned me, I told them everything about the dark web, the invitation, the tent, the maze, the clowns. They didn't believe me, of course. Why would they? But here's the thing. When I finally got my phone back, there was a new message waiting for me. It was from an unknown number with no subject line, just 2 words. Next year? I deleted the message and threw my phone across the room, but it didn't matter. I still hear the laughter when I close my eyes, and sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I see them, watching, waiting, because the game isn't over. It never was. The end. I won a free trip to a private island from a dark web giveaway. When I got there, the map was marked with the words, "Your grave." Alright, so let me just preface this by saying I'm not someone who usually gets sucked into dumb internet scams. I'm cautious. I don't click random links. I don't give my info to sketchy websites. And I definitely don't mess around with the deep web. But somehow, here I am, telling you about the worst decision I've ever made. And it all started with what seemed like a harmless joke. It was one of those nights where you're up way too late, way too bored, and probably way too willing to go along with dumb ideas. My friend James and I were hanging out at his apartment, eating junk food and watching random videos on YouTube. You know, the usual. At some point, he started telling me about this creepy forum he'd found on the deep web. And look, I'm not even sure if it was technically the deep web or just some sketchy corner of the internet. But either way, it gave me the creeps. James has always been that guy, the one who lives for the thrill, constantly testing boundaries just to see how far he can go before something goes wrong. He pulled up the site, and honestly, it looked like something out of a bad horror movie. The layout was clunky, the colors were all off, and there were random flashing ads in the corner of the screen. It felt like the kind of place that'd fry your computer with malware the second you clicked anything. But then James spotted this big, obnoxious banner at the top of the page. It read, "Win a free all-inclusive trip to your very own private island. Click here to enter." I groaned and rolled my eyes so hard I thought I'd sprained something. James, seriously? That's the sketchiest thing I've ever seen. Come on, it's funny, he said, laughing as he clicked the banner. I leaned over his shoulder to watch as he filled out the form. It was basic stuff. Name, email, date of birth. But then he paused and turned to me with this stupid grin. "What?" I asked. "What if I put your name instead of mine?" I smacked him on the back of the head, but he just laughed. "Dude, stop. I'm not trying to get my identity stolen because of some fake giveaway. Relax. It's not like anything's gonna happen," he said. "It's just a prank." Before I could stop him, he typed in my name and email, then clicked submit. The screen froze for a second, like his computer was about to crash. Then it flashed this weird, glitchy animation, static and bright colors swirling together, and a new page loaded. In big, bold letters, it said, "Congratulations. Your trip has been confirmed. Further instructions will arrive shortly." "Okay, that's creepy," I muttered. I was already regretting letting him mess around like that. But James just laughed and closed his laptop, acting like it was no big deal. "You're gonna have fun on your private island," he joked, and I tried to brush it off too. I figured it was just a dumb prank site designed to freak people out, and nothing would actually come of it. Except something did. Weeks went by. and I totally forgot about the whole thing. Life carried on like normal. I went to work, binged Netflix at night, and scrolled through Instagram whenever I was bored. James and I didn't even talk about it again. But then, one day, I got an email. The subject line was, "Your private island adventure awaits." At first, I thought it was spam. I mean, who wouldn't? But when I opened it, the email looked professional. There was no broken English, no weird phishing links, nothing that screamed scam. It even had a digital boarding pass for a private jet leaving from Miami, along with a detailed itinerary for the trip. There were photos of the island, a lush paradise with white sand beaches, turquoise waters, and luxurious bungalows. The email claimed the trip was fully paid for, no strings attached. The sender's address, though, was what gave me pause. It wasn't from some legit-sounding travel company like info@islandgetaways.com. It just said norply@oblivion.net. I stared at the email for a long time, trying to figure out if it was some elaborate scam. The logical part of me was screaming, "Delete it! Don't touch it!" But then, there was this little voice in the back of my mind, the same voice that's ruined countless nights of sleep, with questions like, what if it's real? Looking back now, I realize how stupid it was to even entertain the idea. But at the time, I was burnt out. Work had been a nightmare. My girlfriend and I had just broken up. And honestly, the thought of escaping to a private island, even if it turned out to be a scam, was tempting. I figured, worst case scenario, I'd fly to Miami, find out it was fake, and spend the weekend there instead. Maybe hit a Starbucks, hang out on South Beach, and fly back home. No harm, no foul, right? So, I replied to the email. Just a short message, confirming that I'd received it and asking for more details. Within minutes, I got a response, short and to the point. It simply said, "Your reservation is confirmed. Transportation will be provided upon arrival in Miami." That should have been my second red flag, but instead, I started packing my bags. I didn't tell anyone about the trip, not even James. Honestly, I didn't want him to make fun of me for actually going through with it. I booked a cheap flight to Miami and arrived early in the morning, my stomach churning with this weird mix of excitement and unease. As I walked through the terminal, I kept expecting to see some sketchy guy holding a sign with my name on it. And well, that's exactly what happened. He was standing by the baggage claim, dressed in a sharp black suit that made him look more like a secret agent than a travel guide. He didn't smile or even introduce himself. He just nodded and gestured for me to follow him. Everything about him screamed professional, but there was something off, like he was too polished, too robotic. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice low and even, "your car is waiting." I followed him outside, where a sleek black car was parked at the curb. As I climbed into the back seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The windows were heavily tinted, and the driver didn't say a word as we sped off toward, well, I didn't know where. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, trying to sound casual. "To your flight," the man in the suit replied. That was all he said. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a private airstrip. A small white jet was waiting on the tarmac, its engines humming softly. There were no logos, no signs of any airline, just a blank, sterile-looking plane. "Have a safe journey," the man said as he opened the car door for me. As I stepped out onto the runway, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. but it was too late to back out now. The jet was pristine, almost too pristine. As I climbed the steps and stepped inside, I couldn't help but notice how everything looked brand new. The white leather seats gleamed, the wooden panels shone like they'd just been polished, and the air smelled faintly of something artificial, like air freshener masking. Something else. It felt less like stepping into a luxury private plane, and more like walking into a sterile, lifeless showroom. What struck me first was how empty it was. I was the only passenger. There weren't even those little touches of human activity. No crumpled magazines, no forgotten water bottles, nothing to suggest anyone had ever been here before me. It was like they'd prepped the entire plane just for me. That thought should have made me feel special, but instead, it made my stomach twist in knots. A flight attendant, if you could call her that, appeared from the back of the plane. She was tall, pale, and her movements were eerily precise, like she was following some invisible script. She wore an all-black uniform, with no logos, no name tag, nothing to identify who she was or who she worked for. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," she said in a soft, almost robotic voice. "Please take your seat. Your flight will depart shortly." I sat down near the window and tried to relax, but everything about her felt off. Her face was perfectly symmetrical, almost too perfect, like she'd been airbrushed in real life. She walked back to the galley, and I could hear her quietly humming. No song I recognized, just this unsettling, tuneless hum that seemed to echo through the otherwise silent cabin. Before I could dwell on it any further, the engines roared to life, and we were taking off. The plane climbed higher and higher, and as the city disappeared below us, I realized just how isolated I was. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, no way to call anyone or let them know where I was. It was just me, a flight attendant who looked like she came out of some uncanny valley nightmare, and this eerily silent jet heading somewhere. About an hour into the flight, the attendant came back with a tray of refreshments. There was a glass of champagne, a neatly folded napkin, and a single piece of fruit. An apple. I didn't touch it. Something about the way it was presented, almost ritualistic, sent a chill down my spine. Instead, I tried to make conversation, hoping it would make me feel less like I was in the opening scene of some psychological thriller. "So," I said, forcing a smile, "where exactly are we headed?" The email didn't give me a lot of details. She tilted her head slightly, her smile never wavering. "To your private island, of course." "Right, but like, where is it? What's it called?" "It doesn't have a name," she said, her tone flat. "It's just for you." Her answer didn't make sense, and the way she said it was so devoid of emotion that it made my skin crawl. I decided to drop the subject and turned to look out the window instead. Below us, there was nothing but endless ocean. No islands, no ships, not even clouds, just an expanse of blue, stretching as far as I could see. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was waking up to complete silence. The engines had stopped. The cabin lights were dim, and when I looked out the window, we were still in the air, but hovering over a dense, fog-covered island. The moonlight barely cut through the mist, casting an eerie glow over the trees below. The sight was beautiful in a way, but also deeply unsettling. It didn't look like a paradise. It looked untouched, wild, and wrong. The flight attendant appeared again, standing in the aisle, like she'd been waiting for me to wake up. She wasn't holding the tray anymore. Instead, She had a folder tucked under her arm, which she handed to me without a word. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a map of the island, crudely drawn, with handwritten notes marking points of interest. Most of it seemed normal. There was a beachfront villa, a hiking trail, and a snorkeling cove. But in the middle of the map, far from all the other locations, there was a red X. Next to it, in bold, messy letters, were the words, Site Zero. "What's at Site Zero?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She just smiled, that empty plastic smile again. "You'll find out." Before I could press her any further, the plane began descending. My ears popped as we dropped lower and lower, and soon the wheels hit the ground with a jolt. The landing was rough, like the runway wasn't properly paved. When the plane finally came to a stop, the flight attendant gestured for me to follow her. The moment I stepped outside, the humid air hit me like a wall. The island smelled like salt, damp earth, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something faintly metallic. The fog was thicker on the ground, swirling around my ankles as I walked. Waiting for me on the tarmac was another man in a black suit. He didn't say anything, just nodded and motioned for me to get into a golf cart parked nearby. The drive to the villa was silent, except for the sound of the cart's wheels crunching over gravel. We passed through dense jungle, the trees so tightly packed that they formed a canopy overhead, blocking out most of the moonlight. Occasionally, I thought I saw movement in the shadows, quick, darting shapes that disappeared as soon as I tried to focus on them. It was probably just animals, I told myself. At least that's what I hoped. The villa was extravagant, to say the least. It was perched on a cliff, overlooking the ocean, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive infinity pool, and modern, minimalist furniture that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. But despite its luxury, there was something about it that felt cold, like it was all for show. It didn't feel like a place anyone had ever actually lived in. The man in the suit handed me a key, nodded once, and left without saying a word. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, before finally going inside. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. There was no sound of waves, no rustling of trees, just this heavy, oppressive silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The villa was fully stocked with everything I could possibly need: food, drinks, clean towels, even a set of clothes in my exact size. It should have been comforting, but instead, it felt invasive, like someone had been watching me long enough to know my preferences. I tried to settle in, but the map kept nagging at me. I couldn't stop thinking about that red X and the words, Site Zero. What the hell did it mean? Was it just some weird marketing gimmick, or was there something they weren't telling me? I told myself I'd wait until morning to check it out. Maybe it was just a scenic overlook, or a spot for a photo shoot. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. As I was lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I heard something. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I realized it was a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from outside. It was slow, deliberate, like someone knocking on a door, except it was coming from the glass wall facing the jungle. I froze. The tapping continued, steady and unrelenting, but when I finally mustered the courage to sit up and look, there was nothing there, just the fog rolling through the trees and the faint outline of the jungle beyond. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. And then, as I was about to turn away, I saw it, a single handprint smeared on the glass, right at eye level. It wasn't mine. I don't think I slept at all that night. I just sat there, clutching the edge of the bed, staring at that handprint on the glass. It wasn't large, not like it belonged to some towering monster or anything. It was normal-sized, almost delicate. But that's what made it worse. Whoever, or whatever, left it wanted me to know they'd been watching me, and that deliberate, calculated malice was far scarier than any wild animal or supernatural force. By the time the sun came up, the handprint was gone. The glass was spotless, like it had been wiped clean overnight. I tried to tell myself it was just condensation or something, but deep down, I knew better. Someone had been there. Breakfast was waiting for me in the kitchen, laid out neatly on the marble counter. Fresh fruit, eggs, toast, coffee, all my favorites. I didn't touch it. The idea of eating anything they'd prepared made my stomach churn. I poured myself a glass of water instead and sat at the counter, staring at the map of the island. That red X in the center of the jungle. It felt like it was daring me to come find it. I knew I should just stay in the villa, wait out the weekend, and leave as soon as possible. But curiosity has a way of eating at you, doesn't it? It's that little voice in the back of your head, whispering, what if? What if you're overreacting? What if it's nothing? What if you're just being paranoid? So, against my better judgment, I decided to check it out. The jungle was oppressive. The humidity was so thick, it felt like I was breathing through a wet towel, and the air buzzed with the sound of insects. I followed the map as best I could, using the flashlight on my phone to cut through the gloom. The trees were so densely packed that they blocked out most of the sunlight, casting everything in this eerie, greenish half-light. The farther I went, the more I started to notice strange things. At first, it was little details. Trees with claw-like gouges in the bark, patches of ground where the grass had been burned away. But then I found something that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was a small clearing, and in the middle of it was a pile of bones. They were picked clean, bleached white by the sun, and arranged in a way that didn't feel natural. They weren't scattered like you'd expect from a predator's kill. No, they were laid out deliberately, almost ritualistically, in a perfect circle. And in the center of the circle was something even worse. A skull, split clean down the middle, with what looked like rusty nails driven into it. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, staring at that grotesque display. My brain was screaming at me to turn around, to run back to the villa and lock myself inside. But my legs didn't move. It was like the air itself was holding me in place, forcing me to look. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan, coming from deeper in the jungle. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder and louder, echoing off the trees. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded human, but wrong, twisted. I bolted. I don't even remember running back to the villa. 1 second, I was standing in that clearing, and the next, I was slamming the door behind me, gasping for air. My clothes were soaked with sweat, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I locked every door and window I could find and collapsed onto the floor, shaking. But the map was still sitting there, taunting me. The red X burned into my mind like a brand. Site 0. By the time night fell, I'd convinced myself it had to be some kind of elaborate prank. Maybe the bones were props placed there to mess with me. Maybe the growl was a recording set up to scare tourists for some sick thrill. It was stupid, I know, but I needed to believe it wasn't real. The alternative, that something was hunting me was too terrifying to face. I decided to go back. Not that night, of course. I wasn't suicidal. But the next morning, I figured if I could just make it to Site Zero, I'd find some clue. Something that would explain all of this. Maybe I'd even find someone else. Someone who could tell me what the hell was going on. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the tapping again. It started softly, like the previous night, but this time it was faster, more frantic. It wasn't coming from the glass wall this time, though. It was coming from the front door. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a metal lamp, and crept toward the sound. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep a grip on the lamp. The tapping continued, relentless, as I reached the door. I peered through the peephole, my breath catching in my throat. There was no one there. But then I noticed something on the ground, something small and white, just barely visible in the dim porch light. I opened the door slowly, my heart hammering in my chest, and picked it up. It was a Polaroid. The photo was blurry, like it had been taken in a hurry, but I could still make out the image. It was me, standing in the clearing with the bones, staring at the skull. I dropped the photo like it had burned me and slammed the door shut. Someone, or something, was watching me. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the living room with all the lights on, clutching the lamp like it was a lifeline. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last, until finally the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows. I grabbed the map and a backpack, stuffing it with water, a flashlight, and a pocket knife I found in one of the kitchen drawers. I knew it was insane to go back out there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Site Zero held the answers I needed. If I didn't figure this out now, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what the hell was out there. The hike was even worse this time. The air felt thicker, heavier, and the jungle seemed quieter, like even the birds and insects were afraid to make noise. I passed the clearing with the bones, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, following the map until I finally reached it. Site Zero. It wasn't what I expected. There were no ancient ruins, no secret treasure, no grand reveal. It was just a hole, a massive pit in the ground, surrounded by a crude wooden fence. The air reeked of decay, and flies buzzed around the edges. I stepped closer, holding my breath, and peered inside. The pit was filled with bodies. Some were fresh, their faces frozen in expressions of terror, while others were little more than skeletons. They were all stacked haphazardly, like garbage, their limbs twisted and broken. And at the very bottom of the pit, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure. It was crouched among the bodies, motionless, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were sunken, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. It looked up at me, tilting its head like a curious animal, and I realized with horror that it wasn't smiling. It was baring its teeth. When it moved, it wasn't like a person. It didn't stand or walk or even crawl like anything I'd ever seen before. It just shifted, fluid and unnatural, its limbs bending at angles that shouldn't have been possible. The sound of its movement was the worst part, this wet, crunching noise, like bone grinding against bone. It moved toward me, one jagged limb at a time, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for so long, my chest was burning. I stumbled backward, tripping over the uneven ground. My foot caught on the edge of the pit, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought I was going to fall in. I managed to catch myself, my fingers gripping the loose, splintered wood of the fence, but the figure in the pit froze. It tilted its head again, almost as if it were confused, before it raised one hand, or what I thought was a hand. Its fingers were long and sharp, more like claws than anything human. It pointed at me, its grin widening so much I thought its face would split in two. And then it whispered something. I couldn't hear it at first, not over the blood rushing in my ears, but the words became clearer as the thing moved closer to the edge of the pit. "Come down," it said, its voice rasping and wet, like it was choking on the words. "Come down, come down, come down." I scrambled to my feet, my heart slamming against my ribs. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. The thing began climbing the pile of bodies, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. It was fast, too fast. I ran. I don't even know how I managed to find my way back to the villa. The jungle seemed to close in around me, the trees leaning toward me like they were trying to grab me, and every shadow looked like it was moving. I could still hear it behind me, that awful crunching sound, growing louder, like it was right on my heels. At one point, I tripped over a root and hit the ground hard, scraping my hand on the rough dirt. I forced myself to get up, ignoring the pain, and kept running. When I finally burst out of the jungle and into the clearing where the villa stood, I thought I'd made it. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. But the second I turned around, I knew something was wrong. The villa wasn't empty anymore. The living room was trashed. Furniture was overturned. The glass coffee table shattered into 1,000 pieces. The walls were smeared with something dark, something that smelled metallic and sickeningly sweet. I wanted to believe it was mud or paint, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I stepped carefully into the room, the floor creaking under my weight. The kitchen was the same, a chaotic mess of broken dishes and spilled food. The fridge door hung open, its contents spilling out onto the tile. But what made my stomach drop was the dining table. The table was set for two. There were 2 plates, each with a meal perfectly arranged on them. Steak, mashed potatoes, and green beans, like something out of a 1950s TV dinner ad. The food was still steaming, but the chair opposite mine was pulled out, tilted at an odd angle, like someone had just stood up. And then I saw the Polaroid. It was propped up against the glass of water on my plate, waiting for me. My hands were shaking so badly, it took me 3 tries to pick it up. The photo was clearer this time. It showed the pit, but now there was something new in the shot. Me. I was standing at the edge of the pit, but my face wasn't mine. It was smiling, wide and grotesque, just like the thing in the pit. I dropped the photo, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to run, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible, but I didn't know where to go. I was on an island, surrounded by miles of ocean. There was no one here, no one to help me, except the golf cart. It was still parked outside. If I could make it to the airstrip, maybe, just maybe, I could find a way off this island. I didn't know if the plane was still there, or if anyone would be waiting for me, but it was the only plan I had. I grabbed the flashlight and pocket knife from my bag and threw open the door, sprinting toward the golf cart. The jungle seemed even darker now, the fog thicker, like it was trying to swallow the light from my flashlight. The cart started without a hitch, and I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, the wheels kicking up dirt as I sped toward the airstrip. The path was winding and narrow. and I had to swerve several times to avoid crashing into the trees. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I swore I could see shapes moving in the fog, but I didn't dare stop. The engine roared as I pushed the cart to its limits, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw the airstrip, I almost cried with relief. The plane was still there, its engine silent, but the door was open. I abandoned the cart and ran toward it, screaming at the top of my lungs. "Help! Please! Someone help me!" But no one came. The inside of the plane was just as empty as before. The champagne glass was still on the table, untouched, and the lights were dim. I stumbled into the cockpit, hoping to find the pilot, but it was empty too. There were no controls, no buttons, just a blank dashboard and 2 empty seats. That's when I saw it. Another Polaroid, sitting in the pilot's seat. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and flipped it over. This one wasn't blurry. It was crystal clear. It showed me, sitting in the golf cart, driving through the jungle. But in the background, just barely visible through the fog, was the figure from the pit. It was standing in the middle of the path, watching me. I dropped the photo and turned to run, but I froze when I saw the doorway. It was there, standing in the entrance to the cabin. Its head was tilted, and its grin stretched wider than ever. "Leaving so soon?" it rasped, and then it lunged. I didn't even have time to scream. The thing's movement was so fast, so sudden, it was like it didn't have to deal with the laws of physics the rest of us are stuck with. One moment, it was at the doorway, its twisted grin burning into my brain, and the next, it was right in front of me. Its breath reeked, like rotting meat left out in the sun, and its pale, waxy skin was so close I could see the veins pulsing beneath it. I swung the pocket knife wildly, aiming for anything I could reach. The blade made contact, slicing across its arm, and for the briefest moment, I thought I'd hurt it. But instead of blood, this thick, black liquid oozed out, dripping onto the floor and sizzling like acid. The thing didn't even flinch. It just tilted its head, almost amused, and whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." I bolted. I shoved past it with every ounce of strength I had, sprinting down the aisle and back toward the exit. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and my legs were shaking so badly I thought they'd give out. But I couldn't stop. Not now. The open door to the plane was my only chance. If I could just get back to the cart, maybe I could. The floor dropped out from under me. At least, that's what it felt like. 1 second, I was running for my life, and the next, I was falling. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me, and when I looked around, I realized I wasn't on the plane anymore. I was in the jungle, but it wasn't the same jungle I'd run through earlier. This place was different. The air was thick and suffocating, and the trees were twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The fog was darker, heavier, and the sounds of the jungle, birds, insects, wind, were gone. It was silent, completely, unnaturally silent. And then I saw it. In front of me, rising out of the ground like a jagged wound in the earth, was the pit. Site 0. But it wasn't just a hole anymore. The bodies that had been inside it were gone, and in their place was something else. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like the pit was alive, pulsing and shifting, its edges lined with that same black, corrosive liquid that oozed from the thing I'd stabbed. The air around it felt wrong, like it was vibrating at a frequency I couldn't hear but could feel in my bones. and standing at the edge of the pit, waiting for me, was the figure. I don't know what made me move. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it was instinct, or maybe I'd finally just lost my mind. But somehow, I got to my feet and stumbled backward, trying to put as much distance as I could between me and that thing. It didn't follow. It just stood there, watching me, with those sunken, empty eyes and that impossible grin. "Why are you doing this?" I screamed, my voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" Its grin widened. "You." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "What does that even mean? Why me?" It tilted its head, like it was considering my question. Then it pointed to the pit. "This is where you belong." I don't know what came over me, but something inside me snapped. Maybe it was anger or fear or the sheer absurdity of the situation, but I wasn't going to let this thing kill me. Not like this. I tightened my grip on the pocket knife, ignoring the way my hands trembled, and took a step forward. "You want me?" I said, my voice shaking. "Come and get me." The thing's grin faltered, just for a second, and then it lunged. I don't remember much of the fight. It was chaos, a blur of movement and noise and pain. I slashed at it with the knife, cutting deep into its pale flesh, but it didn't seem to care. Every time I landed a hit, more of that black liquid poured out, burning my skin where it splattered. It clawed at me, its fingers slicing through my clothes and leaving deep, bloody gashes in my arms and chest. The pain was excruciating, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. At some point, I managed to shove it backward, and it stumbled toward the pit. For the first time, it looked afraid. Its grin disappeared, replaced by something almost human. Panic. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself at it, using every ounce of strength I had left to push it over the edge. The thing let out a scream, this horrible, otherworldly wail that made my ears bleed as it fell into the pit. The black liquid bubbled and hissed, and the ground shook beneath me, but I didn't let go. I went over the edge with it. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, I was lying on the tarmac, the bright sun beating down on me. The plane was gone. The golf cart was gone. The jungle was gone. It was just me, sprawled out on the cracked concrete, my clothes torn and bloody. I don't know how I got back. I don't know if I even left the island. All I know is that when I looked at my hands, the cuts and burns were still there, proof that everything had been real. I managed to find a dock nearby, with an old, rickety boat tied to it. It shouldn't have even been seaworthy, but I didn't care. I untied it, climbed in, and started rowing. The water was calm, eerily calm, and the island grew smaller and smaller behind me until it disappeared entirely. It's been weeks since I got back home, but I don't feel safe. Not really. Every night, I lock my doors and windows, but I still feel like I'm being watched. Sometimes, I hear tapping on the glass, soft and rhythmic, but when I look, there's no one there. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the pit. I don't know what that thing was, or why it wanted me, but I can feel it. It's still out there, waiting, watching, and one day, I know it's going to come back for me, because I never left the island. Not really. This is where it ends.